Well, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a full walk around of my 1966 to 68 mighty Allis-Chalmers B-10. This tractor belonged to my great-grandfather, and he did quite a lot of tinkering to it. Well, let's just say there's a lot of not original parts to this lawn tractor, and I will explain that as we go, as well as kind of giving an overview of how this thing works and all the systems that it has in terms of fuel, electricity, mechanical, how everything hooks up. So if you're interested in this tractor, or if you're trying to learn something new, you'll get to see firsthand here in a way that, well, I think this lawn tractor is a perfect example of they don't make them like this anymore. And in some ways that's probably for the better. So let's pop the hood and then take a look at the engine. There we go, much better. Now this tractor I had sitting in storage for quite a few years before I got it running again just recently. So let's look at fuel first. As you can see, this cap is split, and I believe this may have been one of the styles of gas caps that needle in there showed you the fuel level. But yeah, it needs a new gas cap. I'm probably just going to go with one that caps it off and doesn't have the fuel level indicator on it, so that needs some help. As you can tell, the paintwork on this is mostly original, but we'll get to that. And the fuel line that I had on it before was all cracked and hard, and the fuel filter in it was clogged, and you basically had to have the tank completely full for there to be enough pressure head to push through the clogged fuel filter to get fuel to the carb. The problem is, if you had the fuel too full, because the cap is split, you'd have gas spilling out everywhere from the cap. So I got some new fuel line, new fuel filter, and I have a fuel shutoff coming in the mail. Not sure where I'm going to put that yet, but we may even get to that in this episode. And you can see a fuel shutoff is needed because you can probably see it's kind of wet around here. Choke cable runs over here, so you can see the throttle and choke. The other thing you'll notice is that the choke lever is backwards. It should be off over here and on over here, but the way it's currently set up, it's actually off over here and on over here. I think that makes more sense because you'll have the choke off where the idle will be set as well. So over here is your idle neutral state. Over here is throttle up and choke up. I think it's just labeled backwards, but that's my opinion. The air filter in this thing originally was just oiled foam, but those are hard to find, and it was easier for me to just go down to the local big box store and pick up a paper element with a foam pre-filter. I think that's probably quite a bit larger than the original one, as well as probably has less restriction than the original, while also having better filtering characteristics. Don't get me wrong, oiled foam is a really good way to filter things, and it is reasonably good for flow, but I think this is probably a better way to do it. All right, so let's get on to the idle mixture screw and main mixture screw. Idle is up here. The main jet is down here. This also acts as the bowl drain. There is no other bowl drain. This is the throttle right here. It's actually at full throttle right now, and that's minimum throttle. And the way it works, I believe, is when it comes up to speed, it will automatically set the throttle back, and then as you increase throttle, it will force that to full. Same thing with the choke here. When it is pointing forward, the choke is off and it's allowing full flow of air. When you point it aft, that is when you're at full choke. I had to add this screw back in. Obviously that's not original. Otherwise it just doesn't really stick in there. Now, something you have to be careful of when working with these carbs is making sure that you don't have too much free play. they don't have too much free play in here. A little bit of lateral play, or I should say, sorry, axial play is fine. But if you have too much lateral play, that creates effectively a vacuum leak, and you'll have very inconsistent fuel metering. It'll make it hard for the engine to run. So I think that's it for the fuel system. You can already see the air system. Air comes in here. And this is a flat head engine. It is a cast iron block, aluminum head, and aluminum oil pan. It takes 2 quarts of oil. And something I maybe should have said earlier in the video is, why do I call it the mighty B-10? Well, that's because this here is a 12 horsepower Briggs. I believe this engine is off of a B-12. The B-12 was a B-10 with the 12 horsepower engine. The B-10 originally had a 9 horsepower engine. It was like 400 cc's for the 9 horse, and this one is about 500 cc's. So that's 25% gain in power. No, sorry, 33% gain in power. So it definitely deserves the title of mighty, I think. So let's go on to the electrical system here. Ignition runs down into the flywheel. I'll show you a picture of how bad the coil is on this thing. It metered out at 3.75 kilo ohms. So it's got just enough just enough coil life left in it to make it run, and we'll run it here in a little bit. But man, it is it's hurting. So before I put this thing back together, I was debating whether or not I wanted to buy a new coil. They're $50, so they're not cheap. But it's running and working now, so I think I'll just let it be where it's at, and hopefully those coils are still available when I need them later. The rest of the electrical system, as you can see, I don't run it with a key, and that is because I'm deciding to, because I don't run this thing very often at all, I want to use the fuel shutoff to turn it off. That way it runs the bowl dry, and it's not going to get clogged full of fuel, or it's not going to have bad fuel sitting in the car, making it harder to run later on. So I'm no longer going to use ignition to kill the engine. However, for right now, this is my kill switch. Starter. Positive lead goes straight to the starter, or to the starter switch, and then the starting lead goes to the start coil of this original delco-remy starter generator. And then obviously the negative goes straight to ground. You'll see that this wiring isn't original. In fact, a lot of the stuff isn't original. You see this bracket up here? That's not original. That is not original. I don't even think that's original. You'll see that come up in this tractor. Most of this stuff is not original, but that's okay. It's a work of mechanical art. So you have your field winding terminal here on the rectifier regulator. That goes to field. The middle one is the starter winding. That goes to start. This one here comes from the ammeter, which is shows you your state of charge. And then you got a fuse, and that's it. There's like 6 wires in this thing. It doesn't get any simpler than this. It really doesn't. So let's talk about mechanicals here. Can you notice the seat isn't original? So power from the engine goes through this loose coupling. That's just to take up any misalignment between the engine and the transfer case. So that shaft goes back. It goes through a, let's see if I can get you in there. You can see it goes through that plastic coupling back there, which is another form of wobble coupling. And then it goes into this 90-degree gearbox. So this gearbox takes longitudinal rotation and turns it into transverse rotation, where this side powers the mower deck, this side powers the transmission. Let's talk about the mower deck first. So the belt is disengaged. You push that lever down, and now it's engaged. And then that has another pulley on the other side that then just goes into the deck. Very simple. The problem is, because this tractor is so old, it's difficult to find belts that properly fit it. I know it sounds strange because belt sizes are, should be the same, but they don't quite make them like they used to, and that I mean by the measurements. So you'll find one belt that is too tight, it's too short, and it just, even if this is disengaged, it will always run the deck. And then other ones are too long, which means that when you try to engage it, it doesn't have enough friction between the two pulleys, and it won't run the deck at all, or it'll run it intermittently. Or it'll just mean that this control is inconsistent in how it delivers power to the deck. That same issue comes up on the power side. So this is the brake and clutch. When you press it in, there is a band brake over here. And that actually works really well. And then when you press that lever, or I guess the pedal, it loosens off tension from this belt. And then this is effectively a clutch because one of these plates slips. And this is another place where belts are really difficult to find, because this belt, if you're in first or second gear, it works out fine, but if you're in third gear, this pulley will spin and there isn't enough friction for it to grab the belt hard enough to drive this thing in third gear. So what you end up having to do is put your foot behind the pedal and push backwards to just give it a little bit more, friction, a little bit more grunt. It is pretty annoying, but that's just the way it is with these old machines. So finding belts is difficult. But the thing that I love is that it has a real 3-speed transmission on it. Almost all, well, I shouldn't say almost all mowers these days have either hydrostatic transmissions or just a belt change system, where it is a manual transmission, but it's just a bunch of different stepped pulleys that give you different speeds. This is a true hobbed gear 3-speed transmission with reverse. And I love that about it. That's my favorite feature of this lawnmower, because it gives you a really good sense of power delivery from the engine to the ground, with the only weakness being that belt. That really does kind of, it's the weak link in the chain here. Let's see, what else do we got? Unoriginal paint. Now, I wasn't around in the 60s, but I don't think Allis-Chalmers used a coarse paintbrush to paint the hood. Just saying. This thing also has a 42-inch deck. It was offered with a 32 and a 42-inch deck. And these being lawn tractors and not lawn mowers, there were a ton of implements that you could attach to this. There were plows, there were snow blowers. You could put all sorts of different attachments on the back. I mean, you can see there are 2 pin spots down here and 2 spots up here. So you could actually hook up some real stuff to these. And I'm sure back in the day when these tires were probably a little grippier, it might have actually been able to pull something. But now these tires are so hard and they slide around so much, you wouldn't be able to pull anything. What's another? So yeah, another problem with these mowers compared to the ones today, and why it's probably a good thing they don't make them like this anymore, is the blade speed. The blade speed is really slow, which means you have to drive slow to get a good quality cut on your grass. And on this one, it's about second gear at about half throttle. Because if you go beyond half throttle, this engine becomes very unhappy. And not that it can't handle it, but it just feels abusive to run it at any more than half throttle. That's just how I feel about it. My mechanical sympathy is a little too high, and I don't want to run it without, I don't want to run it any higher than that. Even though it is rated for it, with them being this old, it's better to let it run easy. Where mowers these days, the deck speed, the blades are spinning so fast, you can travel at, faster than this thing's top speed in third gear a lot of times. So this is not ideal for a larger lawn. I'd say if you have 1 acre of property and then you subtract out the amount of property you have for your house, a shed, any trees or other obstacles, subtract that stuff out. Just say if you own a 1 acre property, that is about the max you would want to do on this. Just because it's not fast enough. It would take you too long to do it. Back when I was in middle school and high school, when I was using this thing, all the time in the summer to mow the lawn, because as a kid, this was awesome. It was kind of the equivalent of my car before I had a car. I didn't drive it around town or anything, but it was a thing that I got to work on, and it was fun. And the property we owned was about half an acre, and it took me a fair amount of time to do it, and I feel like any much more than that, and it just would no longer be economical. So right now it's pretty much relegated to just being itself and not actually being useful. But I'd say if you have a bigger property, like we have 5 acres here, hooking up something like a ball, and then just putting a ball here and then pulling little trailers around, or even lawn trailers for picking up brush or hauling logs or wood that you chopped. That's about what it's good for these days. Not much else. It's more of a novelty. All right, well, let's give it a start and see what it sounds like. Make sure you're neutral. You do not need to press the pedal at all. And then I like to have the deck up just because, well, that's what I like to do. It doesn't need any throttle. Just give it a little bit of choke. Again, make sure you're neutral and press the start button. That is the old school kill switch. So there she is in all her glory, the mighty B-10. This is some real ancient iron, if there ever was any. Not as ancient as some, but old enough now to be not so useful. But there's still a place for these in the world. It's a shame to see these old things rot away in a scrap yard. So I figure, keep them running. It's worth it. More work than most people are willing to put into it, though. That I will confidently say. Your average person is not going to want to deal with these. But for enthusiasts, they're really fun. So hope you enjoyed this look at this old B-10 with the 12 horse. Don't forget 12 horsepower. So till next time, see ya.